Got it.
So good morning and good afternoon, all. Good morning to Southern California. I'm Dr. Shelley Francis, co-founder and principal of EV Noir, a technology company focused on e-mobility solutions, e-mobility best practices, and e-mobility diversity, equity, and inclusion. We work to enhance electrification strategies and decarbonization efforts for a wide range of stakeholders. So that includes utilities, auto manufacturers, municipalities, transit authorities, government agencies, public health, and regional and national organizations. And we also engage in multimodal clean transportation projects throughout the country through research, education, and outreach, like today's town hall. So before we move into our program, I want to recognize our partners for today's town hall: Ford, Electrify America, and the Central Valley Urban Institute. So thank you so much for making this event today possible. I also want to make sure I thank our panelists who have exactly the kind of knowledge and expertise we need to move Southern California's transportation electrification forward. So the conversations ahead of us today are as critical and timely for Southern California as anywhere across the country. We'll hear from industry professionals, community members, and local leaders who will share their insights into accelerating equitable deployment of electric transportation here in Southern California. We know the region has a reputation of being forward thinking, but there's so much more work to be done so that all people, all communities across Southern California can live, play, work, and thrive. As a former medical school professor, one of my top priorities is to emphasize the negative health impacts of fossil fuel. And the medical and public health community well know that frontline communities and under-resourced communities are affected first and worst by tailpipe emissions and pollution. So since they experience higher rates of respiratory ailments when located near highways, byways, refineries, and transportation corridors, unfortunately often skews to be more in alignment with community of color. In fact, under-resourced and BIPOC communities in California experience disproportionately large burdens from transportation pollution. This year's American Lung Association State of the Air report found that people of color in California are 3 times more likely to be breathing the most polluted air than majority white communities, and that close to 20 million people who live in the 13 counties that failed all 3 air quality measures, 14 million are people of color. So these aren't just abstract facts and figures. This is real everyday life experienced by millions of Southern Californians. Due to disproportionate exposure to particulate matter emissions, communities of color are more susceptible to health issues, including the increased risk of lung cancers, heart attacks, asthma, and stunted lung development, all which negatively impact the quality of life for communities of color. Many of you here today are likely already quite familiar with these negative health impacts, whether it's from a family member, a neighbor, or a colleague, or even your own lived experience. So, where do we go from here? How do we build solutions so these challenges in an equitable way? Today, communities of color are less likely to have access to EV charging infrastructure and stations. In California, specifically, Black and Latinx majority Block groups are the only race and ethnicity group that are significantly less likely to have access to any public charger in their block compared to the rest of the state. We also know that there's a strong correlation between public EV charging deployment and the current and proposed electric vehicle ownership expansion. So even more important to prioritize all forms of multimodal electric infrastructure deployment in BIPOC communities. Electric transportation with its tailpipe emissions, lower fuel and maintenance costs can help address many negative impacts of fossil fuels and disparities that are impacted and experienced by underserved communities. But only if equity is incorporated into e-mobility programs from the beginning. So this town hall aims to keep those conversations moving forward. So thank you again for joining us this morning or this afternoon. We have a fantastic slate of panelists from right here in Southern California, and I hope you're as excited as we are for this town hall. So now I'll turn things over to Vanessa Moreland, which is EV Noir's Western States Program Manager. Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Shelley, for opening up our town hall and providing wonderful context to the landscape of Southern California. We're going to go ahead and show the agenda for the day. So next slide, Shane. Wonderful. So we're going to go ahead and start off by introducing our wonderful array of panelists. From there, we will move into a moderated Q&A panelist discussion supported by Dr. Shelley Francis. And then we will transition into 3 breakout rooms, one centered around community partnerships, the second around charging, and the last around workforce development. From there, we will do a brief closing and then conclude the event. So now Shelley will speak briefly about EV Noir.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about who we are. So EV Noir's work centers on 2 specific areas: e-mobility best practice and e-mobility diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've facilitated years of research, which informs the frameworks that we utilize to approach crafting decarbonization strategies. We believe that approaching this work from a human-centric approach is critical, as solutions to some of our most critical issues lay closest to those who are experiencing the phenomenon. So moving forward, again, we want to acknowledge and thank our partners for participating today. And now we'll move into introducing our panelists.
Technology that's easy and effective for Americans. At Ford, this is what innovation looks like.
Wonderful.
Great. Thank you. We just wanted to show a brief video from one of our partners from for the town hall, which is Ford, showcasing the F-150 Lightning, their full EV model of the F-150 vehicle. So we're going to go ahead now and move forward with the panelist introductions, starting with Jacqueline Badejo. Jacqueline is a longtime social and environmental activist who served as a local politician in Los Angeles for 7 years and is very committed to organizational and environmental issues on a global scale. Her expertise in community organizing, advocacy, nonprofits, economic and human capital development, as well as program and policy impact strategizing, have provided a unique scope of transformative leadership and innovative practices and technologies that will help improve the overall quality of life, utilizing her experience in Watts as a model of change. Her slogan, "Let's make the world better together," is Ms. Badejo's bottom line, which encompasses principles of integrity, transparency, and accountability across the board. We welcome Ms. Badejo, and she's going to speak briefly about her organization on the next slide. Jackie, is there anything that you'd like to share about Watts Clean Air and Energy?
I think we actually just lost her. I think her internet might have dropped. So if we
no.
want to circle back to her, we can.
Okay. Thank you for the heads up on that, Kirsten. We'll go ahead then and progress to our next panelist. Thank you, which is Anthony Bento. Anthony is the Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs at the California New Car Dealers Association. As the Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs, Anthony leads CNCDA's member compliance and educational efforts. He serves as in-house general counsel and also supports CNCDA's legislative and regulatory advocacy efforts. We welcome Mr. Bento, and he's going to speak about his organization on the next slides.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. So just a brief overview of the California New Car Dealers Association. So we represent the franchise new car dealers in the state of California. So your Ford dealerships, Nissan, Toyota, et cetera, they are in all likelihood our members. About 90% of the 1,400 in California franchise new car dealers are our members. And they are, of course, engaged in the sale and lease of new and used motor vehicles. They also engage in service and part sales. And as Vanessa mentioned, our primary responsibility, or my primary responsibility, is education. We have a foundation arm as well that provides scholarships to aspiring technicians. One of the things that we consistently hear from our members is that there's a lack of people, technicians, auto techs entering the workforce. So we have a foundation that is designed to provide support for those folks that are considering or embarking upon a career to get to obtain the credentials to become an auto technician. So it's a fantastic career for folks with that aren't super interested in college, but are really good with their hands, interested in doing kind of complicated technical work. And as many of the folks know on this call, there is a increasing level of sophistication and technological advancement of these vehicles. So having quality technicians is going to be critical moving forward in the coming decades as the safety and technology features in these vehicles that are rolling off dealer lots becomes increasingly sophisticated. So we're very proud of our work on that as well. Next slide, please. And we're also very strong advocates of zero emission and EV incentive programs. They are I suppose in an ordinary world where we're not severely supply constrained right now because of the chip shortage and a variety of other factors, there's a severe lack of availability of vehicles generally, which has driven up prices, which is not good for affordability. But in ordinary times, hopefully times we will return to, these incentives are going to be critical to making sure that Californians, especially moderate and lower income Californians, have access to quality, affordable, clean transportation. There's a few programs too that we work with state officials, CARB most specifically on, that in trying to design them so the incentives are applied point of sale. So when a person buys a new, and in some cases, some programs are available for used vehicles, the incentives can be applied at point of sale to reduce a customer's monthly payment rather than being in the form of a check that is mailed or a tax credit that a person receives many months down the road if they qualify. So these types of incentives, the point of sale incentives, I think are key to driving down the costs of a lot of these vehicles and making them more affordable to lower income persons. We also provide compliance and educational materials to our members to make sure that they have staff at their stores that are educated in these incentive programs, but also educated in the unique natures of the unique aspects of how to operate a zero emission and specifically electric vehicle. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Really appreciate learning about your organization and the efforts to support equitable advancement of transportation electrification. We're going to introduce our next panelist, which is Paul Francis. Thank you. Paul is the CEO and co-founder of Kidget, the first and only African-American manufacturer of electric vehicle smart charging stations. Kidget's scope of impact includes projects with municipalities, ports, universities, convention centers, and utilities. Mr. Francis contributes to the advancement of equitable transportation electrification by supporting the Southern California Association of Governments EV Study Steering Committee, the Southern California Edison Clean Energy Access Working Group Committee, the California Energy Commission's CalSeed Fund Subcommittee, and as the Vice President of the American Association of Blacks in Energy. We welcome Paul, and he's going to speak about Kidget on the next slide.
Right. Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah, so been in the space many years now, over a decade in the EV charging industry. And at Kidget, where our company initially was Keep It Green Transit. That's when we were working with ports and cities, doing demonstration projects, trying to show how municipals can infuse electric vehicles into their fleet. And then naturally, we saw the major pain point was the EV infrastructure side. So in 2014, we made the pivot, and fast forward to now, as an OEM with bicoastal manufacturing of level 2 charging stations, where utility approved. We have projects at universities in Texas, and California Energy Commission approved one of our microgrid projects so we could further develop vehicle to grid projects. And when you look at massive infrastructure and innovation and the idea of V2G and EV charging, you can't help to think of green jobs and the necessity that's required and the people required, because our CTO, Jonathan Stevenson, often says, these are not technological issues, but human issues that we're fixing and working on. And when you look at underserved communities and some of the churches that we're working with in South LA and some regions in Watts, or particularly in Northern California, infrastructure is scarce, it's not fitting. And so working together collectively with all of you, we really truly feel we can reshape 100 years of human habit to make sure everyone benefits from the electrification of mobility and energy.
Thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate learning about Kidget's work. We're going to introduce our next panelist, Michelle Kinman. Michelle is the Senior Director of Transportation for the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, also known as LACY, managing the Transportation Electrification Partnership, an unprecedented public-private partnership focused on accelerating transportation electrification in the Los Angeles region ahead of the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Michelle was previously the Clean Energy and Transportation Program Director for Environment California, where she coordinated the Charge Ahead California campaign to ensure that California meets its EV goals and expands access to electric vehicles in low-income communities. She was also a leader in the LA County Electric Bus Coalition, which secured commitments from LA Metro and the city of LA to transition their bus fleets to electric by 2030. Prior to turning her attention to California, Michelle was co-founder and deputy director of Crude Accountability, a nonprofit that works with communities in the Caspian Sea Basin to protect the region's environment and ensure environmental justice. Michelle has a graduate certificate in environmental policy and management from the University of Denver and a BA in international studies in Russian from Washington University in St. Louis. We welcome Michelle.
Thank you, Vanessa. I wasn't expecting you to read all of that bio, but really appreciate being here. It's such an honor to be with this group this morning. As Vanessa said, I first cut my teeth on EV policies in 2013, coordinating the Charge Ahead California campaign, and got to work with Shreyas on that endeavor, who at the time was with the Coalition for Clean Air. So this is a really nice full circle experience for me this morning. I now run LACY's Transportation Electrification Partnership, which Vanessa explained is really focused around accelerating transportation electrification and zero emissions goods movement here in the greater Los Angeles region, utilizing the upcoming 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games as a forcing function for change. You can see here on the slide a number of our partners that bring together state regulators, local government, utilities, labor, leading industry players, and startups. I think we even have a couple of our members in the attendee list here today. I think I saw the City of LA and the Clean Power Alliance here. Next slide. With all of these partners, we've set some very aggressive goals for all of us to reach in LA County by 2028. In the interest of time, I won't go through them all here, but you can see sort of a snapshot that we're focused on transforming how we move both people and goods via electric vehicles, and also how we make it possible for more people to shift out of single occupancy vehicles and onto public and active forms of transit. Next slide. Again, in the interest of time, I won't dig into this too much here. I think we'll probably get to much of this in the course of the conversations to follow, but I wanted to give you a snapshot of how we work to achieve those goals, which really encompasses work on a number of different fronts: on the policy front, on deploying innovative pilots with communities, and also on running workforce development training programs. So I look forward to digging in as appropriate throughout the course of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We're now going to introduce our last panelist, Shreyas Jatkar from the California Workforce Development Board. He is an interagency policy specialist for equity, climate, and jobs. His primary role is to ensure state policies and investments in clean energy and transportation delivers strong labor outcomes, particularly for disadvantaged Californians. Previously, Shreyas worked for the Coalition for Clean Air and the Sierra Club, and served on the board of directors for the California Hydrogen Business Council, Southwest Organizing Project, and City of Albuquerque Energy Council. Shreyas was a Switzer Environmental Fellow during his master's program in community development at UC Davis, go Aggies, and he has a BA in international affairs from the George Washington University. We welcome Shreyas.
Thank you. Thank you so much for including us, inviting us to be part of this forum, and really appreciate getting to link up with old colleagues like Michelle, former colleagues, I mean. So yeah, let me tell you a little bit about the California Workforce Development Board. We are a mission-driven and values-based government agency. We're one of 7 departments within the state of California's labor agency. And as you can see here, we really promote a vision of a high road economy and practice a high road approach to workforce development. So just a little bit about what the high road is. The high road is a metaphor for the kind of economy and society that we think is fit to live in now and in the future. It also refers to a very specific set of economic and workforce development strategies that treat economic growth, shared prosperity, and a healthy environment as necessary complements to community development, as opposed to a tragic trade-off between equity and growth that we often hear about. The concept of the high road is grounded in 3 principles that you see here, the principles of equity, climate, and jobs, where equity refers to building economic opportunity and mobility, particularly for those who have been marginalized, disadvantaged, or denied opportunity. Climate means mitigating and supporting adaptation to climate change, increasing environmental sustainability, building community and economic resilience. And our approach is really a whole economy approach to this. We think that every industry is either impacted by the climate and or impacts the climate, and that there are approaches in every industry to ensure that we're reducing waste, achieving environmental improvement. So we kind of move away from the notion of green jobs as sort of some discrete segment of our economy, and really want to think about greening the entire economy. And then lastly, when we talk about jobs, what we're really talking about is engaging with the state's high road employers, the best employers, to increase the quality of jobs and design skill answers to their shared needs. And then lastly, with this slide, I just want to say a few words about what does it mean to have a high road approach to workforce development. There's so much I could say, of course, but I will just boil it down to what we call our 4 essential elements of what makes this a high road approach to workforce development. The first is industry-led problem solving. And when we use the word industry, we're talking about employers and workers and unions where those exist. And the second essential element is that the industry partnership, the training partnership itself is a priority. We really are moving towards creating an infrastructure, a skills building infrastructure that can last over time, that has the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. And so the partnership is more important than just a training program. It can outlast a program. 2 more points, incorporating worker voice and wisdom into the partnership and its activities and its decisions, and then industry partnerships driving the training solutions. There's a lot more information about these principles, what they mean, how we operationalize them, and these essential elements or practices of a high road approach to workforce development on our website. So I encourage folks to go to our website and go to the initiatives page, and then look at high road training partnerships, where you can find a lot more information. Next slide, and I'll go quickly to wrap up here. So the high road doesn't just magically happen. We need to be deliberate and intentional to make these conditions occur, and make sure that we're developing both policies as well as workforce programs or interventions on both the demand side of the labor market, where we talk about jobs, and the supply side, where we talk about training. So here's just a few examples of what we're doing specifically in the transportation arena. With our High Road Training Partnerships Initiative, we're investing in a number of projects in the clean transportation arena. We have partnerships with zero emission vehicle manufacturers, BYD and Proterra and their union partners, the sheet metal workers with BYD and steel workers at Proterra. Public transit operations. We're in freight and logistics in the trucking and warehousing segments, supporting an entity called the California Mobility Center, which is focused on developing advanced vehicle technologies. And then the work that I do really is focused on the policy side. And just one example is that we're very involved in helping to develop and actually coordinate the implementation of the state's zero emission vehicle market development strategy, or the ZEV strategy. Looking forward to saying a little bit more about that. I'll just wrap up by saying we do have significant new funding for our High Road Training Partnerships Initiative, looking to expand the portfolio of projects in clean transportation. And so please stay tuned for announcements of grant opportunities, and start thinking about building those partnerships between industry, workers, employers, community, et cetera. Definitely check out our website for more information. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear all of the initiatives coming from the CWDB. We're going to backtrack slightly now that Jacqueline has connectivity back in the town hall. Jacqueline, we provided an intro to you as a panelist. Would you like to speak briefly about Watts Clean Air and Energy? And if so, we welcome you to unmute yourself.
Yes, good day. Thank you so much for inviting us to participate in this event. Watts Clean Air and Energy Committee, we've been active from about 2014. Oh yes, my camera's back. I was having technical issues, which leads to the conversation of infrastructure relative to even EVs. And so we have been, dedicated to ensuring that for this just transition that we all deserve, individuals, businesses, and the overall community, that we do our due diligence to ensure that no one is left behind, being that we have legislation that's here. That's why we help advocate for SB 551 with Lacey, the Better World Group, and over 100 plus organizations to make sure we have a ZEV, zero emissions board, to ensure that there is equity embedded in this process. Currently, we serve as the AB 617 co-lead for the South LA Community Steering Committee. And, through SQAMD, these are where many of the incentive programs come from. So we're just doing our due diligence as a small organization, partnering with many great partners to make sure that the education and workforce development and entrepreneurship piece is in place. So I'm here. Watts Clean Air and Energy Committee, we have a curriculum that we've been implementing, virtual community action planning, because a lot of this infrastructure design and implementation, it needs to be ground truth to ensure that every player needs are met. And again, like I said, no one is left behind. So it's just an honor to be here, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Really appreciate hearing about all the amazing work that the Watts Committee is working on. We're now going to start transitioning into our moderated Q&A discussion with the panelists, supported by Dr. Shelley Francis.
Wonderful. Thank you for those wonderful introductions. Really looking forward to getting a deeper dive into our discussion today. So just to level set, we just want to go quickly over the ground rules for our moderated discussion. So please remember to pose your questions in the chat, and we will do our best to grab those questions and pose them back to the group. And then also just remember to remain on mute for the duration of our Q&A. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, I am going to it's kind of going to be a round robin type discussion. So we'll pose questions to the panelists, and then we'll also pose questions from the chat. So this first question is going to be posed to all the panelists. And so the question is, how does your organization define equity? And then what is your organization doing to incorporate equity into your transportation electrification efforts? So how does your organization define equity? And what is the organization doing to incorporate equity into your transportation electrification strategies? And so, Michelle, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Francis. Lacey's mission is to create an inclusive green economy. So for us, that means that we're working on creating pathways for underrepresented groups to engage in the green economy at every stage in the clean tech ecosystem. And we define underrepresented groups to be inclusive of BIPOC communities, women, LGBTQ members, veterans, and formerly incarcerated individuals. And with that in mind, we're really working to intentionally recruit more underrepresented groups into our startup programs. We're also offering workforce development programs on both EV and EV charging, maintenance, and repair. And we're co-designing and deploying zero emissions technology via pilots in partnership with community-based organizations. We currently have pilots in Pacoima, San Pedro, and Leimert Park that I'd be happy to share more about as we get going. But those are some of the ways in which we are incorporating equity into our transportation electrification work. I would be remiss, I realized I didn't mention policy. So Jacqueline very nicely mentioned Senate Bill 551, which was a bill that Lacey and our Transportation Electrification Partnership sponsored this past session that made it very far into the legislative journey, but didn't quite pass those last few hurdles, but would have created a zero emission vehicle authority, really sort of a single point of contact for California state agencies to ensure that we've got accountability and that we're all moving in the right direction and that would really prioritize equity. So important to note that we're also working on the policy and regulatory front as well with our equity endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that detail, Michelle. So now I'm going to turn to Anthony. Anthony, same question for you. We'll all the panelists will be answering this one question to start us off. So again, how does your organization define equity and how are you incorporating equity into your transportation electrification efforts?
Sure, thank you very much. So our focus at the California New Car Dealers Association is obviously the retail and service side. Making sure that people from disadvantaged, diverse communities, low income people that don't have access to or don't have the resources to purchase a high-end, EV, like these vehicles that are coming onto the marketplace are cost prohibitive for a lot of folks. We are advocates for incentives and programs to ensure that these vehicles are available to Californians from disadvantaged low-income backgrounds. We're also an advocate for people that are from lower socioeconomic means to have access to quality jobs at our stores. California, the new car dealers in the city of California employ over 150,000 people. A lot of these jobs are accessible to people without a college degree, but require some amount of training. So for example, the scholarship program that I mentioned earlier provides $5,000 awards to applicants on an annual basis if they qualify. The qualifications are fairly low, but you need to be in a career technical education program, often at community colleges, that they often offer these types of programs. So it allows people to have that pathway to have a career to service these types of vehicles that are increasingly becoming complex. And it can be a very good middle class job for a lot of folks. Again, folks that are not is interested in going down the collegiate pathway that I think many of our panelists chose for our careers. So we're coming at it from the angle of both increasing affordability for lower income persons for these vehicles, and also making sure that there's a career pathway for again, people coming from disadvantaged communities. And our members, I think their bottom line ultimately benefits from both of these types of initiatives, because the more inclusive we are, the more we're going to share prosperity.
Thank you for that perspective, Anthony. So one of the, I guess, most common questions that we get in instances like this from facilitating past conversations is that audiences want to know where they can find examples of successful programs that have been successful at integrating equity into their programming. So based on your experiences, what are some notable examples that you've seen in terms of successful programs that have incorporated transportation electrification? So I'm going to go to Shreyas and then Paul on this one.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and actually real quick, if I could just go back to that first question, because I think that'll help set up a little bit of the response to this, which is, we define equity as you would expect in sort of the economic realm. And for us, equity is about, it's any intervention that's aimed at reducing inequities and disparities in the labor market. So it is about who we serve, it is about how we serve them. And a big point that we make is that there is no equity without quality jobs. We cannot train our way to economic equity. We can, that is a big part of it, but we need to have quality jobs, and those don't just automatically appear in our economy. And so we have a whole number of intentional sort of interventions that we are making to ensure that there are quality jobs that are worth training and connecting people to in the first place. The response to your question, though, is we've seen a lot of great examples with our high road training partnerships where I think our California Transit Works project that's been around for a number of years, predates our funding indeed, is a great example where it's an effort to upskill the existing workforce at public transit agencies so that there's career mobility for those existing workers. And then you're creating the space for new workers to come in. If we don't have that upskill and backfill kind of strategy, we're not creating the opportunity. And the high road approach to workforce development that's embodied in these projects, and again, California Transit Works is a great example of this, is that it's about benefiting the industry as a whole. It's not just about workers or employers separately, but really this partnership that's identifying win-win. By investing in the training and professionalization of public transit operators, we've seen call times go down for complaints and service requests and things of that nature. Like the industry service is improving as a result of investing in the workforce, and that's the kind of sort of virtuous cycle that we think is really positive from these kinds of investments that again are centered in industry-based training partnerships.
Thank you, Shreyas. I think it's very critically important to make sure that you are in building that new workforce and that next economy, tapping into those different communities that we're specifically focused on here today in terms of thinking about under-resourced communities and those that are impacted worst and first by overexposure to transportation emissions. So Paul, you're an entrepreneur, you are a business owner, tell us, what your perspective is in terms of, thinking about transportation electrification and the workforce economic development opportunities that you're seeing in your work.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley. This is a very critical question. And when you look at our industry, we're at the nexus of mobility and energy. And so for us, when we look at equity, you have to look at the full gambit. And so we look at it from a perspective of access, affordability, and partnership. And when we look at access, it's having locations that we've identified as EV charging deserts, such as in South LA, such as in Watch, such as in Oakland and other areas in Michigan we're looking at, where the infrastructure capacity is not there. However, if the proper investment with entrepreneurship and you have folks that are dedicated to inputting the infrastructure there. When you look at trades like electricians, masonry work, these have been around in Black and brown communities for decades and they're successful in these trades. When you look at climate tech in this industry, that's what we have to focus on transitioning into. That's giving them access to contribute, to feel like they're part of this. So now once it's in the community, now they have responsibility of it, they're in partnership. And one thing we're doing now is creating affordable access to clean fuel, especially when you look at putting microgrids in faith-based organization parking lots. Faith-based organizations are the watering holes for communities. They often own the most land in communities. So when properly working together, however, working with utilities that have the opportunity to upgrade infrastructure, what we see now is the totality of affordability, access, and partnership. And when you look at our team as a whole, our board is completely diverse, right? Our software programmers and engineers, Latinx woman. Our chemical engineer and leader of our microgrid project, Latinx men, they all own a percentage of the business. And so we also see how there's talent in our communities. And we're not just in underserved communities, but we're also in middle-class communities as well. We don't want to look at Blacks and Browns as folks who just need handouts, just the space to show their skills and their talent and how they can be available to make an impact. And when you look at our, ARC, we've been here for 10 years. We help contribute to the largest single site install in California history at LA County Fairgrounds, right? And so now what we're seeing is success through these California funded programs. NYSERDA accepted us into their program. States now are starting to see the contribution of Blacks in the industry, and not just as folks with jobs, but as leaders. So last year, when we worked with Lacey to inaugurate that first training program, our team worked with them to facilitate maintenance workers that can now go out and troubleshoot chargers that are out there. Because the dirty little secret, we all know who make them, 30%. So when you blend that together, we look at it from access, affordability, and partnership.
Thank you, Paul. That was very expansive and a thorough response. I heard a number of different things in your feedback. One, in terms of exposing diverse communities to this technology. One of the ways that you do that is through economic and workforce development opportunities, one, and then engaging with diverse partnerships. So making those public-private partnerships are going to be key to helping to facilitate and deploy charging infrastructure in an intentional way. Now, I want to pivot and take some questions from the chat because I see there's a lot of activity happening there. And so I want to make sure that we have the opportunity to lean into the audience questions. So one of the key questions that's coming up in the chat is just how are we engaging the rural communities in this conversation? So what are we doing, or what can we do to bring infrastructure and deploy this infrastructure to rural communities so they also have access? So this question is open to all the panelists. So, what are your thoughts on best practices or ways that we can do this?
I can jump in, as I had thrown a quick response into the chat to get us started. One program that folks may be aware of is now called the Clean Cars for All program that is operating in numerous locations throughout the state, but I think especially successfully in the Central Valley. That is a program wherein if you are an individual, a low-income individual who has a high polluting vehicle, that you may be able to turn that in, scrap that vehicle, and receive what used to be up to $9,500 worth of incentives. That number may have changed over the course of time, but to receive incentives to be able to purchase a new or a used advanced clean car vehicle, as well as offering additional funds to be able to install charging infrastructure. And that's been a program that's been implemented now for many years by a group called Valley Clean Air Now, or Valley CAN, successfully all throughout the Central Valley. So it's a really great model, only one solution, but a very good solution to look into.
No, thank you for sharing that solution, Michelle. I think it's really critical that we get more programs like this out there, as well as, in addition to having these programs available, making sure that we are intentionally marketing and doing outreach to communities. That's one of the roles that our organization, EV Hybrid Noir, plays, is to really change the paradigm of what electrification looks like and what EV adoption looks like. So again, I want to go to another participant to speak on the rural issues. So, what opportunities do you see in terms of helping to build and amplify infrastructure in this setting, as well as doing education and outreach to rural communities and rural partners?
Yeah, we at KIDGET really believe in private investment working hand in hand in partnership. EV Hybrid Noir and what Electrify America is doing is a great example and can be a template of how you're able to scale infrastructure throughout interstate locations in rural communities. I think what you guys are doing, the blend of outreach, connecting with people, and then having private investment kind of follow that, not with just the education, but putting the money where their mouth is and putting the infrastructure there. Because now with the current administration and new packages, it's there where you'd have that blend where now rural communities can participate, not be left out. I remember Sam Walton said people, when he was out there competing with Kmart, people in rural areas brush their teeth too. And so I think it's similar concept where you kind of have to approach it where once you touch them and you see, and they see the value, because folks in rural areas, they really believe in value. And that's what's here in EV infrastructure and EVs, I really believe.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And thank you also again for the shout out. Jacqueline, I want to turn to you so that you have an opportunity to share some of your perspective too. What are some of the strategies that you found to be effective in terms of engaging diverse communities in this conversation or in clean transportation and really amplifying this conversation and opportunities?
Yes, most definitely. This question also ties back into equity and kind of the framework of what does that look like. And so for Watts Clean Air and Energy Committee, we believe in educational engagements that empower, because at the end of the day, this is something that has been mandated through legislation. And a lot of people, they are unaware of how that will look like on a day-to-day basis. And so we have a National Drive Electric Week. We just had our sixth annual event relative to that. Even where we highlighted a campaign we did with Velos, 40 million reasons to go elect. So the environment is interconnected, as many categories of the environment. And it's the same thing when it comes to how you approach EVs. We want to make sure that not only do they have education, but pathways. And then the most important thing I believe that has been helpful is the advocacy, having community groups that are boots on the ground, have access to the people and the information so we can kind of put the puzzle together. Because it is about what Paul was mentioning, the access, affordability, and the partnerships. So simultaneously, we've been working with various church or let's say religious organizations to build up the microgrid settings. And the reality is the infrastructure at the end of the day. Does the community itself have the capacity for the infrastructure? And that's something I believe we all have to focus on. I served on the Watts Neighborhood Council for 7 years. And one thing I learned is that each community has its own specific needs. And so if you're an organization or a community group that is able to get to the specific needs of the rural or disadvantaged communities, I believe that's a good starting base to grow from. And as well as the legislations, that was one of the main reasons Watts Clean Air, we stepped up to the plate to become co-leads for the AB 617 South LA Steering Committee, where we advocated for other disadvantaged communities who just were not being incorporated in the map. And so also utilizing that opportunity because it ties into what Michelle was speaking of earlier, the Replace Your Ride. From the state, a lot of these initiatives, they're born. And so when you're able to have the community voice at the table, then you're able to design these programs properly, because we haven't learned from the last reign of that program that it was designed for the disadvantaged communities, but they were not the ones applying and receiving the resources. And so we want to make sure that we do our due diligence to educate, engage, inform, and create those pathways. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Jacqueline. And that's so critical because diverse communities are just that, they're diverse. And so it's really important to bring that information about these different programs in a way that's intentional, that's culturally appropriate, and that speaks to the diversity, embraces the diversity of those different communities. So now I want to, talk more a little bit about how these different key stakeholders play such a significant role in us accelerating or collaborating and working effectively through partnerships to help accelerate EV adoption. One of the key players in this conversation are our dealerships. So Anthony, you know, this is teeing up for you. So one of the questions that has come through in the chat is that, you know, what is the role of dealerships in helping to sell, helping to promote EVs? And like, how can we do a better job in terms of working with dealerships around energy, education, and accessibility to both used as well as new EVs?
So I think that, well, the role of dealerships is to sell and service and lease automobiles. And one of the advantages of the system that we have, where there's franchisees that operate dealerships, is there is access to dealerships in a lot of areas that often don't have, are underutilized by larger corporations. I'm thinking about rural areas in particular. They're often well served or comparatively better served by dealerships than many other businesses that tend to focus in on large urban areas where you're just going to have the highest rate of return. So dealers have a responsibility to educate their customers when they're purchasing a vehicle, certainly about the unique nature of how to operate an EV. That I bought a plug-in hybrid about a year ago, so I'm kind of like halfway, like a toe in the water, a foot in the water. But there's been a lot of thinking about just issues like the cost of electricity and how much that impacts your ability to operate a vehicle and when to charge it and charging access, all these types of things. You're not used to if you're filling up a car, that with gasoline. So there's a lot of opportunities to partner with different organizations for dealer. There's a Plug Star program in particular where it's quite active in Northern California, where dealers partner with an organization to certify staff members. So when a person comes in, they have an EV specialist that is on staff, because still we're in a situation where the reality is 95% of the vehicles, or 95% of the vehicles that are being sold are still ICE or internal combustion engine vehicles. So you're not going to have every salesperson be equally adept at being a knowledgeable person about how to effectively sell an EV. So increasingly dealers over the last few years have been working with different programs, whether it's their OEMs or a third party like nonprofit that specifically educates salespeople on the importance of making sure the customer is aware of these issues, making sure the customer is fully aware of the incentive programs that might be available, et cetera. So their dealers have an important role to play. And as the market share for electric vehicles increases, I'm fully expecting that the number of people at dealerships that have that level of expertise is going to continue to increase. Because if you're in an environment, which we were up until fairly recently, where a customer would come in, and still like many OEMs don't have to this day, major auto manufacturers do not have electric vehicles that are currently available. So if you walk into a dealership interested in a Toyota dealership, and I'm not knocking on Toyota specifically, that like they've done a fantastic job making hybrid technology available and affordable for folks, but you can't buy an electric car. So if you're a Toyota dealer, you don't have anything, maybe you have something in your used vehicle inventory. But I think that as this changes and as these circumstances change and as the number of vehicles and availability increases, there's going to be an increasing role, an increasing opportunity for EV specialists at dealerships to be able to educate customers at the onset of their EV purchasing and EV operating experience. So I think they have a key role, and it's something that we're very cognizant of and trying to educate our members of the importance of that role.
Thank you so much for that, Anthony. I mean, I think what you've said, along with the other panelists, shows that there's so much opportunity and still a lot of opportunity for education, for outreach and engagement to really help accelerate this conversation in order for us to continue to expedite and expedite the transportation electrification process to all communities. It's going to take all of our industries to really work cohesively and intentionally to really help amplify this conversation. So one of the things that we know, are very well aware of, is that we know Southern California is a leader in clean transportation statewide, nationally, and globally. But that leadership must take us to the next level, and it takes us to the next generation. And so in order to do that, we need policies, projects, initiatives, and partnerships to get more electric vehicles out there. So we need more electric buses, we need more electric medium and heavy duty electric trucks, e-bikes. So it's all about multimodal electrification. And so in order for that deployment to be equitable, inclusive of all people, we all need to work collaboratively together. So that's why this discussion today is so critically important, and there's really no time to waste. So in order to help us keep facilitating these conversations, we're actually going to transition to our breakouts now. And so I just want to provide some guidance on how the breakouts will work. So in a few minutes, you'll see a button up on your right-hand screen that says to join. So you're going to click that, and you'll be taken into a breakout room where you'll chat for about 30 minutes. Please remember that the breakout rooms are not recorded, but there will be guidance from the room facilitators on what your discussion points and areas will be. So we look forward to you having an even more intimate discussion about these very issues that we've been exploring here in our panel.